A different type of insider threat is growing and spreading very, very fast. Deepfake attacks people. People have to be part of the cyber defense strategy.
Deepfake threats aren't real until they really, really are.
Employee information can sell on the dark web at the price of gold or even more.
Deepfake can override or overrule security processes.
80% of organizations do not have a clear protocol of dealing with a threat like this.
It's interesting, deepfake has been around for a very long time, but in the past year and a half or so, it's just matured so quickly.
30 minutes of audio needed to create a convincing audio deepfake down to anywhere between 3 and 10 seconds.
Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. When we think of insider threats, we usually have a view of a disgruntled employee or stolen passwords, but a different type of insider threat is growing and spreading very, very fast, one that is enabled by deepfake technology. This threat does not show up on your security log and is not on your radar because it never existed in the first place. We are talking about the fake remote worker fraud. The deepfake workers, convincing, credentials, and completely fabricated. In this session, we will walk through real case studies, show you how these attacks work, and most importantly, what HR and hiring managers can do to stop them. Please join me in welcoming my colleagues Jason Thatcher from Breacher AI and Noah Blier from NameTag. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Hello. Great to be here.
Good. So I'm Aarti Samani. I'm from Shreem Growth Partners, and we focus on executive training, employee training, and driving awareness so people can understand what this attack vector looks like and they understand how to recognize it. And my colleagues, Jason Thatcher. Jason, tell us what you and your company do.
Hey, I'm Jason Thatcher. I'm the founder of Breacher AI. We do deepfake red teaming, and we focus on deepfake risk assessments through adversary emulation.
Thank you. And Noah, tell us about yourself and NameTag.
Hi. So I am Noah. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at NameTag. We're the pioneers of deepfake defense identity verification and the first company to apply identity verification to workforce account protection scenarios, such as detecting fake IT workers.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this session with me. So audiences and our viewers, you have a complete package today from the start of the hiring process all the way to identity verification. And at each point, we will show you how you can spot these fake workers and the tactics and technologies and processes that you should be using to stop them going any further in your organization. So to start with, is this even a real problem, right? When we talk about deepfakes, I often get the pushback that is it a real problem? It's too hypothetical. It's somewhere in the distance. And I'm assuming, Jason and Noah, you hear something very similar from the market, right? So together, we put some of these stats here for you so you can understand that actually this is not some hypothetical threat. This is very real and very present. So Noah, do you want to go through some of these numbers and help our viewers understand the enormity and the scale of the problem?
I think the key thing to hear that we see that deepfake threats aren't real until they really, really are. There's a lot of, deepfake photos and such going around LinkedIn that show candidates who look, and kind of maybe in the uncanny valley of deepfakes. And it's easy to see that and think to yourself, oh, I could have spotted that easily. But the reality is that people don't. There's been a lot of research that's shown that humans think we're very good at spotting deepfakes, and we're really, really not. These technologies have progressed immensely, even in just the past few years. We've gone from 30 minutes of audio needed to create a convincing audio deepfake down to anywhere between 3 and 10 seconds, which you could probably get just from clipping the audio from me talking here right now. The cost of these threats are also just off the charts. You see here the $600,000 stat. The reality is that one deepfake impersonation incident can be a existential threat to a business. And that's really what we're dealing here. When we talk about a fake IT worker, this is somebody who has gained access to the innermost sanctums of your networks and systems. And I think it keeps CISOs up at night to think about what they could do with that access.
Yeah. And Jason, this 80% stat really stands out for me. 80% of organizations do not have a clear protocol of dealing with a threat like this, which is so present and so real.
Yeah, in my mind, I think we're very unprepared. It's interesting, deepfake has been around for a very long time, but in the past year and a half or so, it's just matured so quickly that it's caught everyone kind of off guard. I think incident response plans, right, ensuring that you have the correct escalation paths and that your users are aware and trained on how to escalate these threats. I think the challenge is how does this manifest within an organization? Is it a phone call? Is it social media? Is it a live deepfake video conference? So it's a great segue to kind of give an example of what a live deepfake actually is.
Let's do that. We can do a live deepfake, but could you just help our audience understand what is deepfake? Like, let's set a baseline. What is a definition of deepfake? And when we say deepfake fraud, what do we actually mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of confusion over it. So deepfake is not, it's basically, it's generative AI, which uses a likeness of a real person and then uses synthetic media to basically create a fake personality or someone to commit identity fraud. Perfect example, as you're showing right now. And it's not generated AI content, right? There's this kind of misconception that, hey, I'm going to go generate a video on AI and that's a deepfake. Not really the case. It's where you're taking the identity of someone, you're basically stealing it to commit fraud and using AI deepfake to make it more convincing. So that's a great one. I love it.
So what do you think of my new avatar? Convincing enough? Okay.
I think, Jason, you hit on this really important point, which is deepfakes tend to use generative AI as sort of the baseline technology. But typically what we've been seeing is that it's the most effective deepfakes aren't sort of starting from scratch. They're building off of an example. I mean, that's really how this technology works is you provide it with an example. You provide it with like an audio clip of somebody's real voice. You provide it with their profile photo off of Facebook, some sort of baseline. And then it turns that into something incredibly realistic, but you can do whatever you want with that. It's effectively cloning technology in a way. And there's so many things that you can do with that. If you can convincingly impersonate somebody else, the sky's the limit, basically, for the types of fraud you can commit with that impersonation.
Exactly. Yep.
So we kicked off the conversation with talking about insider threat and the threat of the fake remote worker fraud. So what we are seeing in market is that recruitment is now the prime target. Recruitment is holding the keys to the front door that allow these fake workers to enter the organization, which then creates havoc. And we will talk about what kind of insider threats they create. But I often also hear pushback in the market, like, why HR? Surely the cyber fraudsters should be targeting the CISO's teams, our security defenses, etc. And actually, when we think about it, it's not that difficult to understand why they target human resources, right? Deepfake scam targets people. It is all about manipulating people's trust, familiarity, emotions, etc. And human resources works with people. So it makes perfect sense, doesn't it, that this kind of fraud should attack a unit within an organization that is primarily dealing with people. Traditionally, human resources teams have not really been primed for cyber threats, right? They do the classic phishing email training, etc., but they are never really plugged in with the security conversations. And so in my experience, the guard seems to be lower than it would be in a CTO's office or in the CISO's office. And finally, it's important to note, stating the obvious, that HR holds the key to sensitive data, employee information. Now, this can sell on the dark web like at the price of gold or even more, right? Because that data, it is a gift that keeps giving. You can sell it again and again to crime as a service fraudsters, but then you can use it for other types of frauds as well. So when you put it all together, it makes perfect sense that human resources would be the prime target for deepfake fraud. And we are seeing that in the market today. Do you have anything? Would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, so I think this is a great opportunity for HR and security to actually work together, right? It's traditionally teams are very siloed, especially in larger organizations. What we've seen, enterprise, multinational, all the teams are on their own kind of islands, right? HR's focused on job candidates, admin day-to-day, security on protecting the enterprise. And I think one of the most immediate steps, which is very helpful, is having these two teams interface, conduct higher OSINTs, do better background checks, or leverage technology like name tag to ensure that you're onboarding a actual human being. I think and this is something that needs to be done quickly, like not next quarter. This is something that's much more immediate of a threat. And finally, my biggest concern is honestly the people that have already made it on the inside. There are countless IT workers from North Korea who've exploited this gap, basically, and they have access to code base. And that's a supply chain insider risk just waiting to happen. And I think it's a bigger threat than we kind of fully realize.
Exactly. And to bring it home, Noah, here are some of the examples, right, where we are observing like mainstream news media covering the stories every day almost.
Literally, it seems like, I mean, every single week. I've been following the North Korea threat for well over a year now. The FBI first warned about this back in 2022, and it really took off in the past year. And the thing about cyber criminals is that when somebody discovers a tactic that works, everybody follows suit and they double down. And so far, they've not been stopped. I think, Jason, you hit on this really important point, which is that HR needs to partner with the security team. I would argue you could add the IT team in there as well. These threats aren't going to get stopped unless there is a partnership between them. And if all three departments sort of see each other as being able to help each other. The way I like to put it is, HR teams, talent acquisition folks are not cybersecurity experts most of the time, and you shouldn't have to be. You shouldn't have to rely on your gut instinct to detect whether somebody's like a deepfake Zoom filter or if this ID that they've submitted as part of I-9 validation is actually legitimate. Like, you shouldn't have to zoom in on your screen and check the sides and the corners and everything yourself. There's tools that can follow. Awareness is a critical portion of this. You don't know how bad the threat is, and you're not going to take it seriously unless you know how bad the threat is. But really, all three things need to work together in the same way that all three departments need to work together.
Yeah. So one thing that we can learn from the bad actors is to continue sharing information as much as possible and to stop working in silos, because that's what they are thriving on. So let's bring this home a little by going through a case study. So again, for our viewers, it's not a hypothetical threat, it's real. And we want to walk you through a case study because there's nothing more powerful than telling you what actually happens in reality. So we'll focus on this organization called Know Before. They were targeted by a sanctioned nation last year. The sanctioned nation attempted to plant one of their citizens in this organization, and the whole process from interview to identity verification was powered by deepfake. Now, this is a security business, and I have tremendous respect for the CEO of Know Before, who actually took the brave step to come out in the open, talk about it in media. They ran a whole bunch of webinars and reports and a lot of materials with the prime view of helping other organizations so they don't fall into the trap that Know Before fell into. Now, also remember, Know Before is an organization that provides security training to enterprises. So they are very aware of security protocols and they are very aware of what fraud vectors are going around in the world. But even they, unfortunately, fell for this. So that's why it's very important to take note of what happens and how you and your organization, your teams should be vigilant about it. So let's go step by step what happened at each point. So when Know Before advertised for a very technical role, it was a senior AI engineering role, which is very difficult to hire, requires specialized skill set. So when they advertised for this role, at the job application phase, a lot of candidates applied, but many of these candidates were fake profiles. And these fake profiles, when you look on LinkedIn, when you receive a resume or you receive an application on LinkedIn, when you look at them, they look very, very convincing. And that's exactly what happened here. So the profiles, they use technology, they use generative AI to craft their resumes, to craft their LinkedIn personas in such a way that it really echoes what is in your mind, and you end up shortlisting them, or at least you end up kind of thinking, actually, this is amazing. I can't wait to speak to this person. And that's precisely what happened in this case as far as the information we have. The second phase of recruitment is the profile review phase. At this point, you are looking at the candidate's resume, you are looking at their online presence, and again, it is speaking back to you, it is echoing back to you. But it's important to note that what you see in front of you on the screen may not necessarily be the orchestrator behind the screen. The individual who is sending out these applications or who is putting these resumes or LinkedIn profiles together may be someone completely different. And in fact, it may not even be an individual. It may be a whole team of individuals who specialize at different phases of the recruitment process. So in the team, you may have someone who focuses on crafting very good LinkedIn profiles. Another person may be an expert in making applications for these roles. A third person may be very good in writing resumes and writing cover letters, etc. So there's probably a whole team of people behind the candidate that you are reviewing. What are your thoughts, Jason, on this?
I think think the core of the issue, right, is actually identity verification. And I think that's going to be an increasing concern. And I think a multi-phase approach is necessary. It's a combination of people, process, and technology. Like anything cyber, it's a combination of those three things. But I think the first step is understanding your risk posture and then taking the steps to mitigate these risks, right? As an example, we know that there's a focus on remote engineering roles, right? So having your hiring team or HR hone in on those applicants would be a great first step. And I think fundamentally the hiring process just needs to be not redone, but just improved to close these gaps and prevent this sort of insider threat and fraud from occurring. That's where my head goes. It's a multi-faced issue. It's not just deepfake. It's hiring fraud, it's identity fraud, it's document fraud, but it's not something that's impossible to overcome.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So the next phase of the hiring process is the interview phase. Now, this is the first time that you encounter a live deepfake in exactly the same way that I showed you earlier. So at this point, since this is a remote role, the interviewer is conducting remote interviews. So on the screen shows a face which is wearing a veneer of a persona that they want to portray, but the real face is something different. Now here also there are a few things that we need to be looking out for, right? So we need to be looking out for glitches, for technical sort of disruptions, etc. Now, what do you guys at NameTag recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. The trouble here is that these tools are advancing unbelievably rapidly. I mean, they're advancing at the pace of OpenAI, basically, and OpenAI is advancing very rapidly. I've seen a number of sort of recommended mitigations popping up around LinkedIn, even in reports by Mandiant, Uni42 at Palo Alto, that sort of thing. One classic one is to ask somebody to wave their hand in front of the camera. Many deepfake filters, I will say, cannot handle that. So you'll see a glitch, as you say. Looking for glitches is a great start. At the end of the day, I think, as Jason said, it's about layering defenses, basically. But the challenge here is that these tools are getting better. I mean, literally within the space of 1 week, I saw on LinkedIn a bunch of folks like CHRO types posting about this thread and recommending, hey, ask them to wave their hand in front of their face. That worked for us. By the end of that same week, I had seen somebody else post that they had tried this and the filter worked. Yeah. It was able to pass that. Like, that's the pace at which these filters are advancing. So look for the glitches. I mean, use common sense. You can ask them to move around a bit. You can inspect the background a bit. The thing is, you can't rely on that alone. And there may be very good reasons why somebody's video is glitching. My network's acting up today. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe that's just an excuse.
And then we hit the last mile. So you've interviewed this individual. They look very convincing. They sail through the interview process. You must remember that these are very talented people, or at least they have the tools which allow them to show up as being very talented and very competent technically. So you issue the offer letter. Now, at that point, human resources usually conduct an identity check and background check on the individual. So this is, again, where you will encounter a deepfake in the form of forged identity document, but also in the form of this individual holding that forged ID document on the screen, on the camera, to convince you and to build that trust with you that, yes, I am the person who I claim to be. Here is my legal identity that endorses my claim, and we are having a live conversation. What's not to believe about it? So the candidate was issued the offer. The background checks were conducted, all the background checks and identity verification passed, but in the end, it was realized that they were all forged identity documents. And this is precisely why organizations like NameTag in this conversation sort of very quickly came up with a product which closes this gap. It closes this loophole. So again, to bring home the point that behind the screen may be someone or a team of people entirely different to what you think you're saying on the screen. So what happened in the end? So the person who was hired is the photograph that you see on the screen. Now again, this is a picture which is not a real picture. So a similar looking face had been taken off a website which has stock images. That face was then manipulated to make it look like we see on the screen today. The individual joined the organization, but on day one, they started to install malware on the company device. Now, because KnowBe4 is a security organization, they had all the right alarm bells and processes in place, and those alerts then kicked off as soon as the malware started to install. And Jason will tell us why these processes are needed and why it is important that we actually test that they are working. Just having a process is not enough. The process needs to be there and it needs to work at the right point when we actually need it. So the alarm bells went off. The security team then investigated what was going on, what was the malware, what was being installed. They questioned the individual, did not get a satisfactory response, and they blocked their access to the system immediately. So in all of this, within about 30 minutes of this person joining the organization, the company had realized something was amiss. They blocked the access, and thankfully no harm was done in the process. Subsequently, KnowBe4 engaged with law enforcement agencies, and it transpired that this is part of a larger organized crime that is targeting companies in United States, have been doing for a couple of years now, with the view to getting payment, to getting the salary, which can be sent back to the home nation, and other frauds can be committed. Now, it's important to note that it started in United States, but very, very quickly, this is coming to UK and Europe as well. So every week we are seeing reports that organized gangs are targeting all the Irish businesses or all the tech businesses in the European Union. In UK, we are often seeing this with financial services. So important to understand that this is not a US specific attack vector, that it is very much present in United Kingdom and in the European Union. Also, one of the common pushbacks I get is our organization is not big enough to make it worthwhile for these attackers. Well, let me tell you, a few weeks ago, I was speaking with a company, a 2-people startup in Poland, who were attacked in exactly the same manner. The same process that we talked about in this case study, the 2-people startup in Poland experienced that. So please don't be under any illusion that you are too small a business to be a target. There is no size. They target wherever they can make the money and they can fulfill the agenda that they are set. And these are the faces that you may see in your video interview. So thankfully, some of the organizations who fell victim to this fraud came forward and have shared the faces that they saw. So again, these faces are not faces of real people. They are deepfake. Jason, what would you add to this?
The thing that we're seeing, and there's this belief, right, that your organization may not be susceptible to deepfake fraud. We found that's not the case, right? The thing that has been most interesting to us is that deepfake can override or overrule security processes. So, for example, if you have secondary verifications in check or procedures in place to double check transactions, if you deepfake a CEO, as an example, you can overrule all of this. So don't assume that your organization will be fine. You need to pressure test policies, your procedures, and your processes to verify that your security controls work. Same approach for HR, right? You need to test your assumptions. Are you actually vulnerable to HR fraud? And I think if you kind of test it out and flush it out, you may realize that you have gaps. So step number 1 for any sort of approach is understand your risk exposure and what does your risk actually look like to deepfakes? And I think that's the most critical step. And I think a lot of organizations are skipping past that and assuming that they don't have a problem. That's where you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, good point. Why this is an insider threat. So we talked about the video calls. Noah talked us through some of the glitches, some of the hand waving, etc. But the important point there is the context. Now, Jason, walk us through this, because this is very, very important. The pushback I get from market is, so what if they put a face veneer? Like, why is it bad? And beyond salary, what harm can they do? And the reality is that they can do a lot of harm, right? So just take us through all the different ways in which they can cause harm and therefore why this is an insider threat.
Yeah, I think it's a double extortion play, to be candid, right? I think it's a combination of, 1, getting paid salary. They're taking that money. They're financing North Korea, right? So that by itself has ITAR implications, potentially, right? If you think about it, it's a big risk. You're getting paid, which is bad enough. But secondary is that you have access to proprietary code. You have the ability to push malicious code. You have the ability to exfiltrate data, trade secrets. The risk exposure is massive. The implications are far beyond just collecting a paycheck. And I think as we kind of start to realize these threats, it will accelerate and there may be a secondary motivation behind it as well.
So very problematic, right? And so now HR typically is not, we don't often connect the dots between human resources and malicious code injection. And this is where I want to kind of highlight that point, that when we have a fake worker, which is powered by deepfake technology, when they enter the organization, there's a whole sphere of problem that they can cause and become an insider threat, and a very malicious insider threat. So solving this requires a three-pronged approach, and Noah touched on this earlier. The three prongs are people, process, and technology. Anymore, we don't live in an environment where just having a very strong cybersecurity posture in terms of technology is enough. Deepfake attacks people. People have to be part of the cyber defense strategy. Processes are drawn up and run by people. Deepfake attacks people. Therefore, we have to test and retest and refine and tighten our processes. And of course, technology is a must. Naked human eye cannot detect deepfakes, as we have heard and seen before. Processes alone are not enough. The best technology that you can get and the best technology that is out there should be deployed in order to mitigate the risks that arise from that. So let's look at each of this in detail. So people, process, and technology. So what I mean by people, when I talk about people being part of the defense strategy, I'm talking about making our staff aware, giving them the context of what is deepfake fraud, what does it look like, how does it manifest in your environment, and what are the harms that it can do. Because this is an unusual attack vector in the sense that it's experiential. Unless you have experienced it and you have seen it, you can't anticipate what it might look like. And once you have seen it, you can't then unsee it. So by giving proper experiential training, I don't mean on-demand phishing simulations. I mean a live training where your staff are looking at real deepfake artifacts really brings home the threat and really equips them to spot going forward. Let's talk about process then. Jason, help us understand what is needed in the process phase.
So process it's unique to almost every organization, right? It may be secondary approval requests. It may be you need to verify transactions over $10,000 with the CFO. I think it's really important, right, is that each organization has a process and a policy and a procedure that is followed for handling sensitive information, for hiring candidates, for financial transactions. And the problem is that corporate policy isn't always followed. It's not top of mind for employees, and they may deviate, especially when you introduce authority bias with a layer of deepfakes. Mm-hmm. It may overrule or override that process as well. As an example, like hiring, do we do double checks on candidates, right? Do we do OSINTs? So I think it's really important to reinforce what that process is for the organization and to ensure that it's bulletproof to deepfakes, and then having that layer of defense in place as a backup as well.
Got it. We will go through a little more detail further on. Noah, talk us through what kind of technology should organizations have in place and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some technology components that are basically a regulatory requirement. You know, you have to do background checks. You need to do I-9 validation, for example. But it's really important to examine exactly how robust these technology pieces are to deepfake threats or really any sort of threats. What we've seen is that background checks are not reliable anymore. A lot of background checks effectively are just checking in a social security number against a couple of criminal records databases. That doesn't tell you that the person that you're hiring is actually the rightful owner, I guess you would say, of that social security number. Similarly, the government rolled out remote I-9 validation protocols in the midst of the COVID pandemic. If your right to work validation involves somebody emailing a photo of their passport to you, you can't trust that is not that document is legitimate. What we've been doing with our customers is integrating identity verification technology throughout the candidate journey, as I'll get into in a minute. And it's really important that this identity verification technology is itself extremely robust against deepfakes. So I would say look for technological solutions to verify that somebody really is who they're claiming to be, and look for ways to embed that technology throughout the hiring, onboarding, and even the rest of the employee lifecycle, account recovery, MFA resets when they're talking to you at your help desk, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So very briefly, when I cover the people piece, I talk about 3 C's: critical thinking, contextual awareness, and culture. So what I mean by that, as we spoke earlier, the tech is getting better and better, and therefore it's harder and harder to spot deepfake with naked eye. And so I don't often train people to spot the deepfake with visual or auditory cues. I teach them to apply critical thinking, just pause, question, challenge the request that is being made. Does this make sense in the context of what you know about your organization and the market more widely? Pick up subtle cues. The timing may be off sometimes. The story or the narrative may not quite fit, etc. That's what I mean by contextual awareness. And culture is very, very important, which is again owned by human resources in organizations. So with deepfake fraud, we can almost make a direct correlation between risk exposure and business culture. So a workplace culture where it is okay to say, hey, look, I have some doubts about this request that is coming from my senior. I'm going to trust my instincts and question them. I will not just blindly follow the instructions that are given to me. So it's very important that we drive home this kind of behavior through the awareness training. Jason, tell us about the simulations for testing the deepfake processes.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to consider is that a deepfake is a much more broad and diverse threat. It can come in through email, SMS, voice phishing, I think is what we're seeing the most frequently. So it's a very broad attack surface, right? Video live deepfakes is a perfect example. That really wasn't that common of a threat within the past year, but that's manifested itself as a byproduct of deepfake. So it's important to understand that your attack surface and the entry points are much more broader using deepfakes than traditional sort of email phishing. So it's important to test your entire surface and help educate your user base just to be situationally aware that these may manifest itself in different medias outside of traditional sort of email-based phishing.
Yeah. So change your mindset to think like the attacker and follow that multi-platform journey, right? And these are some of the figures that you have observed through running the simulations, right? Just talk us through these.
Yeah, the scary stat, which is actually the lowest, is 17%. And that means that 17% of a user base will take an action that could directly relate to a financial loss of about $603,000. And that's terrifying, right? So 17% of a user base will give up their credentials, do a wire transfer, or give up sensitive information. That's what we've seen as our average across the board. 62% cannot spot synthetic media. That's based off of our data from our year-long testing, which is all voluntary. So we're not forcing people to take these tests. It's all just optional and at will. And 62% have a hard time struggling to identify what's real and fake based off of our testing. And 78% of organizations are vulnerable to some degree. It's actually closer to 100, but we wanted to be very unbiased with our data, and that's a straight reflection of how many simulations we've done for organizations and which ones are vulnerable. The key is that organizations that have done awareness training prior are less vulnerable, right? The ones that have not tend to be much more vulnerable.
So emphasizing or backing the point that we made about training, process, and then technology. Noah, help us understand how name tag helps users or organizations.
So NameTag has invented a new and better way of verifying the identity of somebody at a distance that is uniquely robust against deepfake media. And we call this deepfake defense. Without getting too deep into the weeds, it's important to understand how bad actors will be using deepfakes. So a deepfake ID, deepfake selfie, deepfake video filter, as we've been talking about. And that's where this idea of process is so important to understand your attack surface. But broadly speaking, identity verification realm, we divide deepfake threats into injection attacks and presentation attacks. So an injection attack circumvents the capture process. So basically hijacks the flow of data. So somebody inserts a deepfake into literally into the data stream. A presentation attack is somebody using, like, maybe they've printed out a deepfake ID or they're holding it up in front of the camera on another screen. So NameTag uses this technology we call cryptographic attestation to block digital injection attacks entirely. We're the only identity verification provider that does this. We're certainly the first to have invented this way of doing it. And this means that it's effectively impossible or very difficult, never speak in absolutes when it comes to security, to use a deepfake against us. A bad actor is forced into printing it out onto a piece of paper or holding it up in front of a screen, which is where our adaptive document verification and spatial selfie technologies come into play. The core user flow is one that I think everyone in our audience is going to be familiar with. You scan an ID document and you take a selfie. and we verify or validate both the document and your selfie, that these are legitimate captures, and then compare the two, making sure that your profile, your selfie, matches the photo on the document. And in this way, we're able to verify with an extremely high level of assurance, an unmatched level of assurance, actually, thanks to that cryptographic attestation, that you really are who you claim to be. Then the key thing is, any technology, however, is only as good and only as useful as the ways that you can use it. So if we hop to the next slide, what we've been working with our customers to do is embed deepfake defense throughout the candidate journey. So you can use this to uncover fake applicants during the interviewing process. We have some customers who are using this actually at the offer letter stage. So when you send somebody an offer letter, you ask them to also verify their identity either before they sign the offer letter or just generally as part of the offer letter process, along with, completing a background check and doing I-9 validation, for example. If you then do that, the wonderful thing about this is that it then seamlessly leads to re-verifying that same person when they're onboarding into your organization. So what we've done is built a solution that places this identity verification, this deepfake defense gate, if you will, in front of the account credentialing stage of onboarding. This is a place you can partner with your IT team. This ensures that only verified hires actually gain access to your systems. It also means that we're making sure that the person who is onboarding into your organization is the same as the person who was interviewing, which is another form of fraud that we've seen bad actors using deepfakes to commit. So there's this idea that you were verifying they're a legitimate person, that they're actually, they're not impersonating somebody else. And then we're verifying at onboarding that they're the right person, that they're actually the person you want to be onboarding into your organization.
Got it. So it's a very thorough end-to-end verification process.
Exactly.
So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. Here are our details. Please do get in touch with us if we can help you with anything. Between Shreem, Breacher, and NameTag, you have a complete deepfake resilience solution, and we can help you prevent insider threats through fake remote worker fraud. Thank you again. Hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.